So this episode is about essential thinking tools, whereas the title is a little bit maybe misleading because it's not only about thinking but also about feeling, to use intuition. So it's a whole body and mind tool, and therefore we create more, right? Synergy by using thinking and feeling both united. So essence, in the dictionary they say it has something to do with qualities to identify something. It's an unchanging nature of a thing, and it's also important part or aspect of something. Well, important, essential, kind of the same. So for me that means when that essential aspect of a thing is gone, it's not it anymore. It can be the functional behavior, but it can also be a material aspect which then allows a certain function or behavior. For example, car, its essence is to drive, the sun to shine, and the knife to cut, which it does by the means of a blade. So when a knife does not have its blade anymore, would we still feel like, have this intuitive feeling of like it's a knife? It's kind of missing something essential. What is the essence of a person? In philosophy we call it personal identity, and basically trying to figure out when is a person not the same person anymore. Am I the same person in 50 years? Interestingly, there is a legal consequence with that, because if I smoke now and I die in 50 years, I basically have killed another person. I shall go in prison for killing that other person, which is not me. If you have the same body but a different mind, like I lose my memories, I'm clinically insane or under the influence of psychoactive substances, back then maybe possessed by a demon, same. Am I still the same person? And the other way around, if you have the same mind but in a different body, like our cells are regenerated every few years, so the material part of me as a person, the body, is totally replaced. Am I still the same person? In sci-fi movies they can transfer a mind to another body, to a machine, or even upload it into the digital realm. So same with the cells being regenerated every few years. There's the story of Theseus, where a ship is sailing for a very long time, the members are replaced and the ship parts are replaced one after the other, and when it comes back home after a long time, finally, is it still the same ship because everything has been replaced? Additionally, it's interesting because all the parts have been collected by someone, and that someone has rebuilt the ship completely. Now suddenly there are two of those. Like, which one is the real? If the material doesn't dictate what it is, it means it's more like an abstract thing, an idea that there's a soul of something, which is the essence of something. So underlying, I think there's a little bit also the problem with the illusion of separation, but also the confusion that we are not able to set certain things apart from each other. Like a map and landscape, right? The abstraction from its manifestation, words and meaning, the symbol and an expression of it. Money and wealth, money is a measurement and wealth is actually an object, a thing. Or like more metaphorically, like the finger pointing to the moon. The finger is a reference and the moon is the thing. We usually often look too much to the finger, to the reference. So the symbol or the reference or the measurement or the abstraction is not the real thing itself, it's not its essence. The thing with illusion of separation, which we usually do, is like throwing a net over the ocean, so the mind can count the separate entities of the ocean, although the ocean is not countable because it's just one big thing, right? It's like introducing concepts and words over reality or creating an abstraction of reality. So why words define and definitions are inherently separating, basically telling us what's inside of its definition, what's outside. And what's even worse with this confusion is that we are unaware of it. And there are solutions to that, thinking tools, to figure out what's really going on, what's the truth, and to expand knowledge and to go deeper of things of its essence. And also we can ask ourselves, what is a thing anyway? Because it's not a thing, it's a moon, right? And when we follow that puzzle, one thing to always pay attention to is to not follow your teachers in the footsteps, but instead look what they were looking for and find your own path and find the essence, your personal answer there. So the first tool is abstraction. Let's just take a simple arithmetic formula, 4 plus 2. It's a composition of two operands, two digits, and one operator, the plus operator. So therefore, it's a binary function creating the sum as a result. Now try to get rid of the concrete, and by that find a common pattern by using other examples. Like instead of 4 plus 2, we used 3 plus 1. And what do they have in common? And if we then filtrate the essence from that what is common and drop the irrelevant, the unessential, the insignificant, the concrete, we somehow generate something more general, something more universal. So from a specific manifestation, we go to a universal principle to figure out its essence. So once we have 4 plus 2 and 3 plus 1, we basically infer the common denominator is x plus y. Then we can also not only replace the operands, we can also replace the operator itself. So we then come up with f from x and y. We could go further from a binary function to an n-ary function which takes an arbitrary amount of parameters and go up the chain of abstraction even higher, and we find on different levels different essentials part of it. I mean, that's also how we teach a child, right? We don't teach a child by telling it, yeah, the answer is 6. I mean, it has not learned anything from it by just providing a solution to one specific example, one manifestation. So rather teach the general principle underneath, the abstraction, the essence. Once it can understand the principle below, it will be able to solve all possible manifestation. So that's amazing, right? I mean, that also comes very natural. So we use inference. We infer a concrete example's meaning on a higher level by looking at a lot of different examples and find a common pattern. That's basically also how to do it in IQ tests, right? So there's a given sequence of symbols or numbers and you have to predict the next number or symbol. It's like a black box, and that very much reminds me of me playing computer games, strategy games, and I can just interact with it, right? I can send some input, I receive some outputs, I can see its observable behavior and somehow try to infer, to figure out the internal workings, its algorithm, its essence. So basically what we are doing here is from the concrete, from the manifest, from the instance of one concrete example, we go higher in a semantic dimension and go more abstract, more generalized. We remove the specifics, and that's kind of a form of zooming out in the semantic domain here, right? Like in biology, they have this taxonomy. When you, for example, want to refer to a conventional house cat, its name is based on which level of abstraction we are looking at. It's Catus, Felis, Felidae, Carnivora, Mammalia, Chordata, Animalia. Yes, I'm reading that because I cannot possibly remember those, but these are basically the essential parts of a cat depending on what level of magnification we are looking at it. So what we did here is a zooming. We can zoom in the semantic domain, but also in a spatial or temporal domain. In a spatial domain, in space, what's big can be perceived as small, and what is small can be perceived as big, depending on the level of magnification. And then different things become essential, or what we see has a different nature, like what seems to be chaos and war on a small scale, when we zoom out on a larger scale, can be harmony and peace again. I'm thinking about the movie Ant-Man, quantum space, right? The word within the word. But anyways, in the temporal dimension, we can do the same. It's like turning a knob left and right to scale these dimensions, and with the temporal dimension, we can make time run faster or slower. I always wonder, like for little insects, flies, they can be so fast in their reaction to us, or we are so slow. Huh? So for them, it might look as if it would be super slow. It's so slow as we look at plants, right? If we would be plants and look at animals, wow, they move so fast. Like imagine I'm a tree and I live for centuries and seeing things going really, really fast forward. But it shows us that all things are relative. What is fast, what is slow, depending on light speed or tectonic plates movement. What is small, what is big, like think about leptons or black holes. Now the interesting thing for us is here that the essence changes depending on the level of magnification of zooming we use in either of these dimensions, not only semantic where we started, but also spatial and temporal. How things are changing in their essence even, of the same thing depending on the perspective or zooming. So we can pick a specific criteria for a single thing, and we see that different values emerge with those changing levels. But of course, we humans are usually very egocentric. We think we are the center of the universe and everything, and we are God's children. No, we are not. We usually would assume that our level of magnification is the absolute reference. But if we would be able to see the bigger and the smaller picture in time or space, things start to get upside down and everything becomes very fuzzy and arbitrary. So the final question then is Is there something like absolute essence, something which is independent, something which is stable from zooming? You know, we can zoom in and out in different dimensions in space, time and semantics, and it still remains this essence. Open question. Second tool is, I named it Implicit for Explicit. So we do have implicit intuitions. For that, I would like to infer explicit criteria. In philosophy, in the science of knowledge, epistemology, that's a very common tool to use to figure out what is knowing. What does it mean when we say I know X, Y, Z? And especially which criteria we use for it? Because we can use that tool to figure out a thing's essence, but also definitions, and a nice tool for self-exploration. For example, like, what are my true motivations? Why do I like or dislike something? Do I like him because of his green hair? Well, remove the green hair aspect and see whether you still like him. So we have this gut feeling, this we know intuitively whether something is right or wrong, true or false, whether it's its essence or not. We somehow feel it, and I would rather call it unconscious thinking, using unaware criteria. So what we want to do is to become conscious about that, about the criteria we use. Therefore we can verbalize it and it becomes explicit knowledge, and we are not anymore blind to our own reasoning, which might be possibly flawed. So our ability, our intuition is allowing us to implicitly tell us what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false. Now we try to build an explicit list of criteria which lead us to an evaluation of right and wrong, included, excluded, whatever it is. So the process is in 3 parts. There is the predicate, like any statement or attribute, property of something, like is it knowledge, any kind of question, right? We put something in and then it yields either true or false. So what is it we want to investigate? In our case, it's essence. Second, there is then the list of criteria which will be built up, the essential parts of something, and the goal of the whole tool is to make this one explicit, and it will grow and maybe things will be removed over time. So coming back to the strategy game example, the black box, this is its internal workings, the implementation of that predicate, in this case essence. And the third part of the process is entities, so examples, like with the arithmetic formula, these are like examples of 4 plus 2 and 3 plus 1 and so on, and a list of examples, and by that we can infer its criteria, its essence. So some of these examples will be inside the circle of what it is. It belongs to the predicate P based on gut feeling or intuitive feeling, and some will be outside of that circle, and we determine that based on the criteria we have. So after doing that for multiple times, we hopefully ultimately come up with a complete exhaustive list of criteria. And by the way, the criteria for knowledge is justified through belief and something else, as they figured out recently, meaning not that far long ago, considering that our definition of knowledge is roughly 2,400 years old. But anyways, something else, the Sherlock Holmes mindset, the importance of deduction is that please always be aware of the importance of first setting up a framework, especially when it's about self-investigation, and then conclude a solution. Because to stay objective, to not be biased by our passions and desires, so set up something which is objective, something which is measurable, criteria, a certain predefined list or threshold, and stick with it no matter what. Then collect the data and stay very much unbiased, double-blinded research and whatever. And let yourself be surprised by the outcome, as Sherlock Holmes would do, without any desired outcome. So if then the result is below or above a certain threshold, we accept it as for what it is. So don't let, please, your own biases, especially your confirmation bias, influence the result. So that of course doesn't mean that the result cannot and shall not be challenged, but it should be challenged because of its methodology being not sophisticated, rather than I feel uncomfortable with the outcome. Because we philosophers would usually say truth over comfort. It's not about feeling good, it's about getting a little bit closer to what's really going on. Or let's rather say, to be progressively less stupid. Similar to the implicit for explicit tool is the parallel words tool. It's like imagine you go to an alternate world, like, you know, these days they talk about multiverses and quantum space, where little details are changed and every possible, you know, divergence or choice we are making will lead to another universe identical to the one of ours, but just this little detail being different. So what we do is we just imagine that and incrementally change one by one little conditions and details of our parallel world. So therefore figuring out what's essential, because once I remove what is essential, it's not it anymore, and then we figure, boom, that's it. It's also nice to apply it for personal motivation research. So first we need to formulate a hypothesis, then we change the variable, we step into a parallel world and ask ourselves, is it still valid? So by that we know already a list of criteria, we remove a certain aspect one by one, and we go further away and further away from our original world until I feel it's like it's not it anymore. We use intuition, and thus that means we found its essence, and if it's still it, well then we continue removing parts until we hit that boundary of it's not it anymore. If I, for example, say I like you because of A, in the parallel world you don't have A, I still like you. Well, that means that was not true. Let's continue, remove B. Oh, I don't like you anymore. Oh, okay, I know. It was because of B that I like you, not because of A. The third and last tool is dots and lines. So it's a way to visualize semantic patterns, or it's also a way to see reality graphically. My brain very much works with visuals and graphics and diagrams and lines and nice drawings to somehow make sense of reality and whatever there is in my mind. So it is a little bit what they call in the German language mal nach Zahlen, like to draw according to numbers. It has three components: shapes, lines and dots. Dots is what's there in reality, the actual thing itself. So in the physical reality, because there is something, right? In our human perception, we live in the world of abstraction. You know, there's a spoon, there's a you and me, and there are all these things. There's even such a thing like freedom and human rights, and these are all abstract concepts which actually don't really exist, but there is something out there. And that's for the mind impossible to grasp. That's why we need concepts to understand it, like the net we throw over the ocean. Cannot really think about, we cannot really comprehend it with our mind, but maybe we can experience it. So these dots, the reality itself, is connected by lines, which is something like meaning, something more abstract. So that's more like the simple parts of reality, the points are connected together, forming lines. This is maybe the net, or the, let's say rather, single threads of the net over the ocean to separate, to dissect, to analyze reality. And these lines are added by the mind, they are not real. And even more abstract are shapes. Shapes are like higher semantic, higher concepts. Let's call them words. So by connecting dots, reality, we create lines, meaning. By connecting lines, meaning, we create shapes, concepts. So these words, these concepts are not real. And the more abstract a concept gets, like the more complex and theoretical, like human rights and freedom of speech and whatever it is, the more complex also the shape becomes. Like when we refer to a dog has certain criteria, like certain dots we connect to lines, and these lines then form a square or a circle. When we think about freedom and equality, these shapes get more complex, a hexagon or even something very asymmetric. Unfortunately, I would say our human brain is very much limited to very simple shapes, and therefore we can only comprehend very simple concepts. So in Western versus Chinese medicine, I studied both, and they have very different perspectives. Western medicine is more like square and Chinese more like circle. We do use different shapes to comprehend reality, but still we look at the same dots underneath. The physical reality underneath is the same, but the way we make sense out of it is a different approach. Different dots are accessible, so different symptoms in medical terms are accessible, connected and touched by lines. So they allow different possibilities, and they also limit us in a certain way based on the shapes they provide. We can look at the different symptoms. Sometimes we would collect them into the syndrome, into the sickness, the disease. Sometimes they would not be connected by this image. It's funny, right? We look at the same body, partially even at the same symptoms, but we infer different images, different disorders. So the conclusion is that within themselves they make sense, but it's kind of impossible, maybe even of disadvantage, to try to unite them. They have both different capabilities, both the pros and cons. And my personal opinion, it's better to have both available, the same with feeling and thinking, right? Because it will expand our ability to perceive reality and go beyond a certain perspective of concepts. To go beyond, like, how is it possible to not only see lines and shapes, but dots? Directly, it seems not to be possible, at least not with the intellectual mind. In Zen Buddhism, though, they try to do that, to perceive reality without concepts. And I think they might have figured it out. You can also, of course, take a shortcut with some breath, energetic work, or certain substances to temporarily disable the ego and therefore experience. Something where the mind can't go, and once the mind is gone, the lines are gone, and there are only dots, or like with the net over the water, you remove the net and basically totally dissolve into water and cut through the illusion of separation. It's useful, but it's not real. So, what is a thing? What is the carness of a car? What is its soul, its essence? Well, ultimately there are no things, no separate things, therefore also no essence, but let's just pretend it is because it's useful, same as language itself and its inherent separated nature. For whatever reason, we are assumed to somehow magically be able to do that. Like, not only with thinking, like to properly sophisticatedly think, to use the brain properly, but also with life itself, or feeling and love and sex. And it's not being taught, but yet we are expected to be good at it. But for me, it's more like a skill, it's an art which needs to be learned and practiced. It's hard work and it requires discipline. Like your muscles, right? They need to be trained and taught and practiced to grow. But not only to grow, but also to be more controlled and more sophisticated. We do get a handbook for our phone, which I guess no one is reading, but we don't get a handbook for our brain, and also not for love, life, sex, and breathing and emotions. So there's something wrong, I would say, in our educational system, because they don't really teach us on how to make use of the brain, or emotions, breath, whatever it is. And I'm glad there are tools to help us to see better, to see more clearly, and to use our brain in a better way. Because the brain is an amazingly complex piece of machinery. So, it's about gaining mutual understanding as much as possible, I would say, to be clear what you mean when you say something. What are you saying? What is your definition? Which criteria do you use? Because usually when we disagree, it turns out for me personally to be a misunderstanding what the other person means. So therefore we understand each other better once we ask the question, what do you mean? And I actually can explain myself what is the essence of my statement. It's about to unconfuse yourself. We seem to be very much confused human beings. But by using these more sophisticated thinking tools, I do have hope that we are able to squeeze a tiny bit more performance out of our tiny brains, that we know ourselves better, that we get closer to reality, and we actually finally figure out what's really going on and stop deceiving ourselves. So what's the essence of something? Well, it might be beyond language, beyond intellectual concepts, but at least we might get a tiny bit of a better glimpse at it, and ultimately to be able to navigate just a bit better through life.